This is a special edition of No Retreat, No Surrender, where we're going to look at some of the most incredible battles in history. And for our first episode, we will look at one of the greatest naval battles ever fought, the Battle of Actium. The year is 32 BC and the Roman world is in turmoil. The great triumvirate of Rome, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus have divided the Roman world between them. But their uneasy alliance soon starts to break down. Meanwhile, Cleopatra, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, is in a relationship with Mark Antony, who has given her a chunk of Roman territory in the east as a sort of client state. However, he is now looking to divorce his wife Octavia in order to marry Cleopatra. This would leave his brother Octavian as the only male heir. So Octavia takes this issue up with her father, who declares war on Cleopatra and her lover. Now, if you think that sounds like a bad idea, you're not alone. In fact, that was exactly what everyone else thought too, since Antony and Octavian had been on good terms until this point and even shared power in Rome itself. They were also both in the middle of civil wars against rebellious generals, and neither of them really wanted to go to war with each other. However, it was simply impossible to reconcile with Antony's new Egyptian lover, since she was everything that Roman society despised. Not only was she foreign, having ruled a nation in the distant east, but she was also a woman trying to control the actions of men. While Octavia traveled to meet with her father, Mark Antony set about gathering his forces to fight both Octavian and his armies in the west and his own rebel subjects in the east. His general Agrippa was tasked with defending the eastern Mediterranean against Octavian's brother, while Antony himself prepared an invasion force to punish those who opposed him. He established a base at Actium on the western coast of Greece and began assembling his navy there. But when word reached Cleopatra that Octavian had invaded her client state, she decided that she needed to take action herself. She assembled her fleet in the port of Patras, just across the Gulf of Ambracia from Actium, where Antony's fleet was stationed. Now, while Cleopatra's navy was much smaller than that of Octavian, it was actually far more powerful than her army, which was made up of less than 30,000 troops. Her navy consisted of around 600 ships, which might sound impressive until you realize that half of them were transports filled with soldiers. That meant that they had a fleet of around 300 warships, which included Queen Quirin's, which were basically 5 banked rowing ships, and triremes, which were the standard warships of the time period. What Cleopatra lacked in ships, however, she'd made up for in experience, since her navy was mostly made up of veterans who had fought against Rome before. On the other side, Octavian's fleet consisted of around 200 ships, but these were mostly brand new, built in shipyards all over Italy, and they were crewed by inexperienced conscripts. Also, his best admiral Agrippa was currently fighting in the east and couldn't make it back in time to help him. Instead, Octavian had put his sister Octavia in command of the fleet. Now, as we can see, there are a few advantages that Cleopatra had here. Firstly, her ships were better and more experienced. Secondly, her fleet was larger than Octavian's. And thirdly, her position was stronger. See, the two fleets were only separated by a very narrow stretch of water. Yet Actium was controlled by Antony's ally, King Salas of Epirus, who allowed Cleopatra's fleet to use its harbors. Meanwhile, Octavian's fleet had to make camp on the open coast, exposed to the elements and far from any real sources of supplies. So, in theory, it would be a simple matter for Cleopatra to sail out, destroy Octavian's fleet, and then sail back to port before anyone even realized what had happened. Unfortunately for her, though, her arrogance got the better of her. You see, while Antony was indeed an experienced commander, Cleopatra wasn't. She may have had a capable navy, but she never took to sea and instead sent her lieutenants to do it for her. As such, when news of Actium arrived, she spent several days making preparations for her invasion of Italy, sending embassies to the Italian states, making sure that they did align themselves with Octavian, and even held military parades for her troops so that they could get in the mood. Meanwhile, Octavian received reports of Cleopatra's movements and saw how she was preparing her invasion of Italy. And unlike Cleopatra, he was actually able to understand what this meant. You see, all the evidence pointed towards Cleopatra invading Italy with her army. After all, why else would she be moving her entire fleet there? Why else would she be making alliances in Italy and holding military parades? All signs pointed to war. And so Octavian knew that he couldn't sit around waiting for her to attack. He had to act first and destroy her navy before she could lay siege to Italy. As such, while Cleopatra was still busy in the south, Octavian got his fleet ready and sailed north to intercept her. Meanwhile, Cleopatra finally set sail for Actium with a fleet of around 180 warships. Expecting to find Octavian's fleet already destroyed or at least weakened enough that she could defeat it easily, what she found, however, was the exact opposite. Not only was Octavian's fleet intact, but it had grown by another 100 ships. Seeing that the battle was inevitable, Cleopatra unfurled her sails and charged forward, eager to win a quick victory and end the war before it even started. Her plan was simple. With her fleet being larger than Octavian's, she would simply overwhelm his fleet and destroy it. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it would have worked perfectly if her ships hadn't been so inexperienced. As the two fleets clashed, the Egyptian ships simply smashed into one another, smashing their bows into the sides of the Romans and sending them onto the rocks. However, when the Roman ships were hit, they simply rowed away, regrouping, and then hitting the Egyptians from the flanks, something that the disorganized Egyptians weren't able to counter. Meanwhile, as the battle raged, Cleopatra was on a chariot watching the battle unfold. When she saw that her ships were losing, she tried to rally her sailors with trumpets and shouts, but no one listened. They were too afraid. So she did something that she shouldn't have done, something that would doom her entire fleet. She took off on a small ship and fled the battlefield. Now, when Octavian's men saw this, they were emboldened and attacked with renewed vigor. Soon, Cleopatra's fleet was in full retreat, with many of her ships captured or scuttled to save them from falling into Roman hands. In total, the battle resulted in around 200 captured ships and around 400 sunk, along with about 20,000 dead Egyptians and 1,500 dead Romans. After securing his victory, Octavian pursued Cleopatra's fleeing ships all the way back to Alexandria, where she eventually drowned after seeing that her lover, Mark Antony, had committed suicide. In the aftermath of Actium, Octavian returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, although he did waste a bit of time defeating Mark Antony's former general Sextus Pompey, who had taken refuge in Spain. But that's not really important right now. What is important, though, is that thanks to his victory, he was now able to defeat Sextus Pompey, annex Egypt, and establish the First Roman Empire. And that is how Octavian won his civil war and became the most powerful man in the ancient world. Thank you for watching! If you enjoyed this video, please follow for more historical tales.